The cold hit first. A sharp, biting gust of wind that snaked under the collar of my beige coat and made me flinch. It was a slap of reality after the suffocating, artificial warmth of the lobby. Then came the sound, the heavy, final click of the glass door shutting behind me, locking me out. My own hotel. And I was on the pavement, dismissed like a stray. My fingers, numb inside my coat pockets, clenched into fists. I could still feel the phantom pressure of the security guard's hand on my arm, firm and impersonal, guiding me out as if I were a piece of trash to be disposed of. Humiliation burned a hot, acidic trail up my throat. I had wanted to see it for myself. My husband, Jinwoo, had acquired the Seraphine Grand a month ago, a glittering jewel of steel and glass in the heart of the city, and he had put it in my name. A gift, he'd called it. A responsibility, I'd thought. I wanted to know how it breathed when the owner wasn't watching. So I had come alone, dressed simply in a dark green dress that fell to my knees, no reservation, just a walk-in on a Tuesday night, asking for a standard room. I got my answer. The night manager, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Albright, had looked me up and down. Her eyes had lingered on my face, my braids, my simple coat, and made a swift, brutal calculation. She decided I didn't belong. "We have a 72-hour advance booking policy for all non-members," she'd said, her voice crisp with dismissal. It was a lie. I knew the hotel's policies by heart. "I'm sure you can find an opening," I'd replied, keeping my own voice even calm. A test. For her. For me. "I'm happy to pay for whatever is available." Her lips had curled into a smile that was all teeth and condescension. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a more suitable establishment." The implication was a shard of glass under the skin. She didn't think I could afford it. She didn't think I was the right kind of clientele. The two security guards had materialized beside her, their presence a silent, looming threat. That was when I knew I had lost. I had come for an anonymous experience and had gotten one, just not the one I'd expected. I was a young black woman in a lobby full of pale, wealthy faces, and I had been found wanting. Now, standing on the curb as taxis hissed by, the anger began to cool, replaced by a cold, hard knot of something else in my stomach. I could let it go. I could walk away, hail a cab, and go back to the silent, sprawling penthouse that was our home. I could tell Jinwoo a sanitized version of the story, or tell him nothing at all. He would never need to know. But the memory of Ms. Albright's smug certainty grated on me. The casual cruelty of it. This was my hotel. My name was on the deed, tucked away in a lawyer's office. These people worked for me, and they had thrown me out. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I scrolled to his name. Just his name, no title. Lee Jinwoo. The screen felt cold against my thumb. Calling him was pulling a pin from a grenade. He moved through the world with a quiet, lethal precision. Problems that came to his attention did not get solved. They were eradicated, cauterized from existence, so they could never grow back. I knew what would happen if I made this call. The quiet Tuesday night at the Seraphine Grand would shatter. I took a deep breath, the city air tasting of exhaust and winter. I pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring. He always did. There was no greeting, just the low, familiar timbre of his voice. "Chloe." He said my name differently than anyone else. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A claim. "I'm at the hotel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A pause. I could hear the faint rustle of paper on his end, the distant, muffled sound of the city from his own window high above it all. Is something wrong? They wouldn't give me a room. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Another silence, longer this time. It was not an empty silence. It was the sound of a vast, complex machine shifting gears. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his study, the city lights behind him, his expression unreadable. His dark hair would be perfect, his custom-tailored suit a second skin. He would be perfectly still, but his mind would be moving at a speed I could barely comprehend. "Where are you now?" he asked. His voice had dropped half an octave. It was a sound I had learned to recognize. It was the sound of a storm gathering far out at sea. Outside, on the street. "Don't move," he said. "Not a request. An order." "I'm on my way." The line went dead. I slid the phone back into my pocket. The wind whipped a strand of my hair across my face, and I didn't bother to brush it away. I just stood there, on the edge of the curb, and waited. I had pulled the pin. It took less than 7 minutes. A car turned the corner, a long, black sedan so polished it seemed to drink the streetlights. It moved with an unnatural silence, a predator gliding through the urban jungle. It pulled up directly in front of me, its engine a barely audible hum. The doorman, who had pointedly ignored me not 20 minutes ago, scrambled forward, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. The back door opened from the inside. Lee Jin-woo stepped out. He was a masterpiece of controlled violence, sculpted into a Tom Ford suit the color of midnight. He moved like the world owed him space, and the world always paid its debt. His eyes, dark and intelligent, found mine immediately, and for a moment, the bustling street, the honking cars, the entire city faded into a muted backdrop. There was only him. He didn't look angry. He didn't look rushed. He looked perfectly, terrifyingly calm. That was always so much worse. He walked to me, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the pavement. He stopped a foot away, his gaze sweeping over me, cataloging the wind-chapped skin of my cheeks, the tension in my shoulders. His eyes were not just looking at me, they were reading me. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. "Just my pride," I whispered. A flicker of something, ice, fire, passed through his eyes. It was there, and gone in a heartbeat. He reached out, his gloved fingers gently tucking the stray strand of my hair behind my ear. The touch was featherlight, a stark contrast to the power I knew he held in those hands. "That," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "is unacceptable." He didn't wait for a reply. He offered me his arm, a gesture of old-world formality that felt both protective and possessive. I took it, my hand resting in the crook of his elbow. The fabric of his suit was impossibly fine, the muscle beneath it unyielding as steel. Together, we turned and walked back toward the gleaming glass doors of the hotel I owned. The doorman, his face now pale with dawning horror, practically fell over himself to pull the door open for us. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere in the lobby shifted. The low hum of conversation faltered. Heads turned. The air grew thick, charged with a sudden, inexplicable tension. Jin-woo's presence was a physical force, a drop in barometric pressure that announced a coming storm. Ms. Albright emerged from her office behind the front desk, a practiced, welcoming smile plastered on her face. It was the smile she reserved for men with expensive suits and the unmistakable aura of power. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Seraphine Grand. How may I—" Her voice died in her throat. Her eyes landed on me, tucked securely at Jin-woo's side, and her professional mask cracked. Confusion warred with dawning panic in her sharp features. Her gaze darted between Jin-woo's impassive face and mine, the gears in her head turning furiously, failing to compute. Jin-woo did not acknowledge her. He continued to walk toward the center of the lobby, his pace unhurried, deliberate. He stopped on the large, inlaid marble compass rose that was the room's centerpiece, forcing everyone to orbit him. He surveyed the room, his eyes missing nothing. The security guards who had escorted me out were standing near the elevators. They saw him, saw me, and froze, their expressions going from bored professionalism to stark terror. "You," Jin-woo said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. He was looking at Ms. Albright. She swallowed, taking a hesitant step forward. "Yes, sir?" "This woman," he said, his hand moving to rest lightly on the small of my back, a simple gesture that was an undeniable act of claiming. "She attempted to procure a room here tonight." "Yes, sir, she did," Ms. Albright stammered, her eyes wide. "But we were fully booked. Our policy—" "You will be silent now," Jin-woo interrupted her. The words were spoken so quietly, so devoid of emotion, that they were more chilling than any shout. Ms. Albright's mouth snapped shut. Color drained from her face. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on me. In the midst of the silent, watching lobby, his focus was absolute. It felt as if we were the only two people in the world. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear, his breath warm. His cologne, a subtle, clean scent of cedar and smoke, filled my senses. "What do you want me to do to them, Chloe?" he murmured. The question hung in the air between us. He was giving me the power. He was handing me the sword. I could tell him to let it go. We could just go upstairs to the presidential suite he undoubtedly kept on permanent reserve. We could leave these people to their lives. A part of me, the part that still remembered being a normal girl from a normal neighborhood, wanted to do just that. But then I saw it again. The memory of Ms. Albright's sneer. The feel of the cold wind on my face. The casual dehumanization of being judged unworthy. They hadn't just disrespected a guest. They had disrespected his wife. In his world, such an insult could not go unanswered. To show mercy now would be seen as weakness. Not just for me, but for him. And I would not be his weakness. I met his dark, waiting eyes. I saw the cold certainty there, the absolute confidence in his own power. And in that moment I made a choice. I would not shrink from the world I had married into. I would stand in it. "Show them who I am," I whispered back, my voice firm. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of satisfaction, of approval. He straightened up, his hand still a warm, possessive brand on my back. He looked from Ms. Albright to the security guards and then to the other staff who were now frozen in place, watching the unfolding drama. "My wife was treated with disrespect," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the marble expanse. "In my hotel," he let the words hang in the air, heavy and damning. He looked down at my arm, where the security guard had grabbed me. I hadn't even realized there was a faint red mark there, the ghost of fingerprints. His jaw tightened, a barely perceptible clench of a muscle. It was the only outward sign of the fury I knew was simmering beneath his calm exterior. This was his vulnerability, my safety, my honor. He had once told me about a woman from his past, someone he had failed to protect. He never spoke of her, but I knew her ghost shaped his present. He would not fail again. "I find myself curious," he continued, his tone conversational, which made it all the more menacing, "about the standards of this establishment, the level of service, the judgment of its management." He looked directly at Ms. Albright. "Bring me the security footage from the front desk for the last hour, and the employee files for every person on duty in this lobby." This was no longer about a room. It was an audit, an inquisition. The danger in the room was no longer a vague threat. It was a cold, sharp-edged reality. People were going to lose their jobs. Lives were going to be upended. All because they had made the mistake of underestimating the quiet woman in the beige coat. Ms. Albright seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Sir, I can assure you, it was a simple misunderstanding." "It was a failure," he corrected her, his voice like chips of ice. "And failures in my empire have consequences." He gestured with his chin toward a set of plush armchairs in a secluded corner of the lobby. "We will wait." He guided me to the chairs, his hand never leaving my back. As we sat, the lobby staff scrambled into frantic, panicked action. Phones were being answered in hushed, terrified tones. Ms. Albright, her face ashen, was barking orders at a subordinate. The two security guards stood stiffly by the wall, looking as if they were awaiting their own execution. Jean Wu sat beside me, a portrait of serene authority amidst the chaos he had created. He seemed completely at ease, as if this were nothing more than a tedious but necessary business meeting. He picked up a financial magazine from the table beside him and began to idly flip through it, but I knew he wasn't reading. He was watching, listening, assessing everything. The silence between us was not empty. It was filled with everything that had just happened and everything that was about to. I watched the frantic movements of the staff, the fear on their faces, and I felt a strange, unsettling mix of vindication and guilt. I had never wielded this kind of power before. I had never been the cause of such fear. It was a heavy, unfamiliar weight. I crossed a line tonight, I thought. I can't go back. As if sensing my turmoil, Jin-woo set the magazine down. He didn't look at me, but spoke in that same low tone. They chose their actions. You are not responsible for the outcome. Aren't I? I murmured, looking at my hands in my lap. I made the call. You did, he agreed. He turned his head, and his dark eyes met mine. You defended your honor. And mine. There is no shame in that. A short while later, a junior manager approached us, trembling, holding a tablet. Ms. Albright followed a few steps behind, her earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. Jin-woo took the tablet. He didn't bother with the footage. He swiped to the employee files. He scanned them for a moment before his eyes stopped. He tilted the screen slightly, so I could see. It was Ms. Albright's file. Her previous employer was a holding company. A holding company I recognized. It was a known front for the Choi family, Jin-woo's most bitter rivals. The air around him grew 10 degrees colder. The disrespect was not random. It was a message. A provocation. They had put their person in his hotel, and she had used her position to insult his wife. They were testing him, seeing how he would react. Get everyone here, Jin-woo said to the junior manager, his voice flat and hard. Every single employee currently in this building. The lobby. Now. The young man scurried away. Within minutes, the vast lobby was filled with the hotel staff. Bellhops, concierges, front desk clerks, even some kitchen staff in their checkered pants and white coats. They stood in a nervous, silent crowd, watching us. Jin-woo rose to his feet. I stood with him. He put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close to his side. It was a gesture of solidarity, of a united front. For those of you who do not know, he began, his voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. This is Chloe Lee, he paused, letting the name sink in. She is my wife, and she is the owner of this hotel. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eyes widened in shock and disbelief. Every gaze in the room swung to me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my face, my dress, my coat. I stood taller, lifted my chin, and met their stares. I would not flinch. Ms. Albright's face was a mask of pure horror. The blood had drained from it completely. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. Mrs. Lee, she choked out, taking a stumbling step forward. Mrs. Lee, I had no idea. It was a terrible misunderstanding. Please, I apologize. She was looking at me, pleading with me. She thought I was the softer target, the way in. For a heartbeat, I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. But then I remembered her cold, dismissive eyes. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was about a woman who judged others based on a shallow, ugly metric and who, it turned out, was a snake planted by our enemies. Jin-woo was watching me, his expression unreadable. He was waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see if I would accept the apology, if I would undermine the absolute authority he had just established. I looked at the desperate woman in front of me, and I said nothing. My silence was my verdict. It was colder and more final than any words I could have spoken. I simply looked at her, my face a calm, unreadable mask, and let her apology wither and die in the air between us. I felt the power of that silence. It was a chilling, absolute power. And in that moment, I claimed it. Ms. Albright seemed to crumble. The last bit of hope drained from her eyes. Jin-woo watched my face for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod, as if I had passed some unspoken test. He turned his attention back to the crowd. Ms. Albright, he said, his voice ringing with finality. And the 2 security officers on duty at the front door. You're fired. Collect your personal belongings and be off this property in 10 minutes. You will be escorted. He glanced at 2 of his own men, who had appeared as if from the shadows, their dark suits and earpieces marking them as separate from the hotel staff. They moved toward the trio of condemned employees. The rest of you, Jin-woo continued, addressing the silent crowd, have a choice. You can work for Mrs. Lee and show her the respect and loyalty her position demands. Or you can leave with them. The choice is yours. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Good, Jin-woo said softly. That is all. He turned, his arms still around me, and guided me toward the private elevator that led to the presidential suite. The crowd of employees parted for us like the Red Sea. As the elevator door slid shut, sealing us in our own silent, gilded world, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Upstairs, the suite was an ocean of quiet luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city's glittering sprawl. I walked over to the window, wrapping my arms around myself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow, trembling feeling in its wake. That was a lot, I said to my reflection in the glass. I saw him move behind me in the reflection. He came to stand just behind me, his presence a warm, solid weight in the vast, empty room. They needed to understand, he said, his voice low and close to my ear. No one touches what is mine. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A creed. It was possessive, dangerous, and the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It was his confession. I leaned back against his chest, and his arms came around me, holding me securely. We stood like that for a long time, watching the endless river of headlights below. His phone buzzed. He stiffened, pulling it from his pocket with a smooth, economical movement. He answered, his side of the conversation clipped and sparse. Yes. When? Where are they now?
His whole demeanor had changed.
The quiet satisfaction was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal focus. He ended the call and slid the phone away. What is it? I asked, turning in his arms to face him. His eyes were hard. That was not just a simple insult, Chloe. Albright was on the Choi family's payroll. They placed her here. Her treatment of you tonight was a deliberate provocation. A test. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. This wasn't about a rude manager. This was about them. His enemies. They had used me. They had targeted me to get to him. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from the hallway, followed by a muffled shout. Jin-woo reacted instantly. In a single, fluid motion, he pushed me behind him, moving between me and the door to the suite. He pulled a sleek, black pistol from a holster I hadn't even known he was wearing. The sound of the safety clicking off was unnervingly loud in the silent room. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice a low growl. The door to the suite burst open. Two men, dressed in black, spilled into the room. They were not Jin-woo's. They moved with a clumsy, brutal urgency. His own men were supposed to be guarding the hall. They must have been taken by surprise. Jin-woo didn't hesitate. 2 precise shots, the sound suppressed to a dull cough, and the first man dropped. The second lunged, not at Jin-woo, but toward me. He saw me as the weakness, the leverage. There was no time to think. Jin-woo was occupied with a third man who had appeared in the doorway. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my body moved. I wasn't a fighter, but I was a survivor. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could reach, a ridiculously ornate, solid crystal lamp from an end table. With a grunt of effort, I swung it with all my might into the side of the lunging man's knee. There was a sickening crunch. The man roared in pain and surprise, his leg buckling. He stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward. He fell hard, crashing into the glass coffee table, which shattered into 1,000 pieces. The diversion was all Jin-woo needed. He dispatched the third man and turned, his weapon trained on the man I had taken down. But it wasn't necessary. The man was on the floor, clutching his ruined knee, incapacitated. Silence descended, thick and ringing. It was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunch of glass as Jin-woo's men finally flooded the room, securing the intruders. Jin-woo crossed the room to me in 3 long strides. His eyes were blazing. He ignored the mess, the intruders, his own men. He came straight to me, his hands reaching for me, checking me over with a terrifying minute focus. His hands cupped my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "You're not hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "I'm fine," I breathed, my hands coming up to rest on his wrists. I could feel the frantic pulse beating there. He didn't touch me. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the raw emotion was gone, replaced by something else. A deep, profound respect. "I saw what you did," he said, his voice low and intense. "You are not afraid." It was not a thank you. It was an acknowledgement, a coronation. In his world, fearlessness was the ultimate virtue. He was no longer seeing me as someone to be protected, but as a partner, an equal, a queen to his king. The last piece of the wall between us crumbled away. The cost of this night was high. My anonymity was gone forever. His enemies now knew my face, knew my name, knew that I was the fastest way to get to him. I was no longer an invisible owner. I was a public target. And he had revealed his only vulnerability to the world. He had shown them what he would kill to protect. Later, after the bodies had been removed and the broken glass swept away, we stood at the window again. The city below was oblivious, a galaxy of unknowing lights. He stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. His embrace was no longer just a comfort. It was a fortress. It was a cage of his own making, one I had willingly walked into. I looked at our reflection in the dark glass. The woman in the simple green dress, and the man in the perfect, dark suit who ruled a violent, unseen empire. We were an impossible pairing, a collision of worlds. He had not rescued me tonight. I had called the storm, and when it broke, I had stood with him in the heart of it. I had made my choice. His grip tightened, a silent promise. This dangerous, breathtaking world was mine now, for better or for worse. And in the absolute, lethal certainty of his arms, I felt no fear. I was home,